She was President Obama's National Security Director and United Nations Ambassador, whose new memoir is Tough Love, My Story of the Things Worth Fighting For. Susan Rice. Hey. How you doing? Great to meet you. How are you? Okay. Now, first thing I wanted to ask you, you're Susan Rice. You know in show business, everybody gets mixed up at some point with somebody else, right? Everybody doesn't. Okay, there are people who have thought I was Bill O'Reilly.
That's unfortunate.
I'm never going to that strip club again. But I just had, some people must think you're Condoleezza Rice.
It happens. It used to piss my mother off more than anything else, my late mother. When she got asked, are you Condoleezza Rice's mother? And we have...
Oh, yeah.
We have ties to Stanford. We were both national security advisors. We're both black women named Rice. And so, you know, it happens to me in airports. It happens to me all over the place where people say, you worked with President Bush. Yeah. You were President Bush's national security advisor and Secretary of State. No. But the funniest time was when I was visiting China for the first time as national security advisor on my own mission on behalf of President Obama. And I met with President Xi, and I'm setting up a summit, and CCTV does a whole big spread in the nightly news, and they say, you know, Susan Rice is in China to see President Xi, and they put up Condi's picture.
Oh.
That shit happens to black folks.
Well, I'm glad you could come here to HBO and say it for real. And one thing I saw was very interesting in your book, you mentioned your mother. You made your career partly as a mediator, and you sort of learned that because your parents were squabbling. And
More than squabbling.
More than, but as a very young girl, you say 7 years old, you were doing diplomacy at home.
Well, unfortunately, my brother and I were living in a house that was a tinderbox. I had two really wonderful, extremely accomplished parents, but they had no business being married. And their breakup was very ugly and sometimes even violent. And I'd be trying to get to sleep upstairs as a little kid, and if I couldn't, I'd run downstairs and sort of spy on them and see how bad it was. And if it was really bad, I'd go in there and try to break it up, sometimes physically, but also sometimes mediating between them, trying to listen to each side and help them.
You did shuttle diplomacy.
Well, it wasn't even shuttle. It was, you know, like proximity talks in my own house.
But I bet you that served you well in the job.
Well, it turned out, but that wasn't the plan at the time.
No,
I was just trying to keep
not.
my house from burning down.
Right. Well, speaking of houses burning down,
yes.
I just have to, what you must think with what went on this week and the last week in the Middle East. Now, I remember from decades people talking about who lost. That was who lost China, right? Who lost Syria? You know, I saw the Turkish defense minister put up the new map of Turkey with a big chunk of Syria he bit off, parts of Iraq, Greece. You know, I remember when George Bush went into Iraq in 2003, the idea, embraced by some liberals, was we have to remake the Middle East. We're going to put a democracy in the heart of the Arab world. Okay, that didn't work out. But Trump and Bush together, they have remade the Middle East.
Well, Trump especially in the last week. It's amazing what...
Well, Iraq,
how much
Iranian...
Yeah, Iraq...
Now Syria.
But
where do you see this going?
It's going nowhere good. I mean, what Trump has done in Iraq and now Syria is, in effect, to cede a portion of northern Syria, Kurdish homeland, to the Turks, and to evacuate the Americans as if it's, you know, his Saigon. We've left our Turkish allies homeless. They're now going to scatter throughout the region. We've given Assad and Putin and the Iranians a green light to take over that territory that they've been long wanting to take. And ISIS is going to come back.
But Assad is going to be okay with Turkey biting off a chunk of his land?
Well, if you're Assad, last week you were missing a third of your country. Now you're just missing a little sliver on the top.
Wow.
That's not bad for 1 week's work.
And watching Republicans not get that upset about this, more upset than we've seen, but not to the point of we should get rid of them, must infuriate you, having lived through Benghazi, that was something that required hearing after hearing after hearing.
8 congressional inquiries.
Yeah. There's really no comparison. I mean, look, it was not a good thing that happened in Benghazi, but the idea that anyone could have stopped that?
Well, Benghazi was a horrible tragedy, right? We lost 4 Americans, including an ambassador. But what we're going to lose as a result of what Donald Trump has done in Syria is we're going to have a whole terrorist resurgence as a result of his pullout. So we'll see the ramifications of that in American and allied lives, I'm afraid, for years to come.
You know what worries me is I think back to 9/11, and I imagine after it happened, bin Laden was saying to himself, wow, I didn't think they would destroy themselves this easily. I knew this was going to be a win for us. But we knocked down those buildings, they overreacted, they attacked the wrong country, they spent trillions of dollars. The Homeland Security Department, that's a big bloated bureaucracy. This whole mess. Putin, in 2016, spent a pittance and got Trump elected, or certainly helped. What do you think about the fact, that idea that it's just too easy to get Americans to destroy themselves?
Well, what is, I think, happening now, and what Putin's genius is that he understands that we're so divided internally. And that, I argue in my book, Tough Love, that our domestic political divisions are, in fact, our greatest national security vulnerability. We can't get stuff done. We can't build infrastructure. We can't invest in technology to beat the Chinese and artificial intelligence. But we've also found ourselves so pitted against one another that all Putin had to do was jump in and exacerbate those divisions, pour salt in the wounds. And we are now almost like a flesh-eating disease, eating ourselves alive. I think we have the ability to fix it because it's a problem of our own making, our domestic divisions.
Well, we have to stop hating each other.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, to me, the Rubicon was crossed when one party, the Republican Party, said, and you see the T-shirts at Trump rallies, I'd rather be with the Russians than the Democrats. We never sort of went there. Like, yeah, I don't like the other political party, but I'm not going to go over to a foreign country. That's, to me, the big difference, when we somehow went there. How do you get back from that?
Well, Bill, I mean, it's horrible. And to say you'd rather be with, our enemy than your fellow American is, I think, a new low. But you get back from it by what we do as individuals in terms of our personal relationships, listening, hearing. It's what we do as a nation, where we really need to change a lot of the rules of the game, which are inviting these extremes to be empowered.
I think we should stop talking politics to each other.
No, well, we can't.
That's part of it.
Well,
we didn't used to do it all the time. We had no idea how much we hated each other.
I've got a very conservative son.
A conservative son?
I've got a very conservative son and a very progressive daughter. And my husband and I are in between. And one thing I've learned from having those differences in my very home at my dinner table is we can't talk about it all the time because we drive ourselves crazy. But you can't not talk about it. We've got to engage each other. And then we've got to do some stuff, I think, at a national level, like mandatory national service for all Americans 18 to 22. Think about it. If for 6 to 12 months, we all had to work together, and we had to understand each other, from some rural kid from Idaho having to work with some kid from the South Bronx.
Right.
It's hard to hate people when you actually know them.
All right, last question. Edward Snowden. Got a new book. I'm trying to get him on this show.
Yeah, he's in my book.
I know. You're not easy on him.
No.
You say he has done immeasurable damage.
Yes.
He says the opposite.
How do you know?
Well, I'm asking you.
Yeah.
And I usually side with people in your business. I was never one of those liberals who said, oh, no, I don't trust the CIA, I don't trust the FBI. I do in general. I think they're patriots.
You're right.
So I don't think Edward Snowden is a traitor like Alden or Walker, people who did it for money, who were trying to sell out their country for themselves. I think he really thinks he's doing a good thing. But what say you? You say he's a traitor.
I call him a traitor, and I mean that with great sincerity. I say that because I know what he did. He stole the most sensitive information.
You know things we don't.
He gave it to people who had no business having it. He's sitting in Moscow, living high on the hog. Yes, we are.
You know that.
I do know that.
Okay.
I know we are profoundly less secure as a result of what he did. We're trying to recover, but that recovery is going to take a long time. And let me tell you, the reason I'm so blunt about what he did in the book is because I know quite how bad what he did is. And I'm not here to ascribe motives. Maybe he did it for what he thought were benign reasons. But the impact of what he did is what I want people to understand, and why I go so far as to use a word that I have not used before.
No. I get it. It's so interesting that the Democrats are the ones now who understand what treason and patriotism is.
We understand what national security is, too.
I know you do. Susan Rice.
Thank you.
Don't ever say it's Condoleezza Rice. Great to meet you. Thank you so much, and for your service. All right.